I think we all have a perfect picture hanging in our mind, a painting of what home is supposed to be. For me, that picture was always Christmas. It wasn't about the expensive gifts or the fake snow. It was about the smell of pine and cinnamon, the crackle of the fireplace, and the way the fairy lights made my mother's face look soft and kind. For 5 years I was gone. 5 long, hard years chasing a career thousands of miles away. It was my dream, yes, but it came with a price, missing those Christmases. Every December, I see their photos on social media, Dad carving the turkey, Mom setting the table, and my heart would ache with that specific deep ache of distance. But this year, it was finally happening. I got the promotion, I booked the flight, and I didn't tell them. I wanted it to be the perfect surprise. The Christmas miracle they didn't see coming. I landed on December 23rd. The air hit me cold, crisp, and smelling exactly like home. I rented a car, drove the familiar winding roads, and felt a smile so big it hurt my cheeks. Every street sign, every mailbox was a postcard from my past. The anticipation was like a tight, sweet coil in my chest. I pulled into the driveway. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Dad's old pickup parked crookedly. The string of slightly messy, colorful lights draped over the Porsche. Mom's handiwork, no doubt. I grabbed my one suitcase, walked up the steps, and my hand hovered over the doorbell. I didn't want the polite ding-dong. I wanted the full, chaotic, shouting, weeping surprise. So I used my old key. The brass was cold under my thumb. It turned with a satisfying, familiar click. The second I stepped inside, the nostalgia evaporated. It was like walking into a room that had been perfectly replicated, but with one crucial, soul-chilling error. The first thing I noticed was the coat rack. Mine was missing. And there, hanging on the center hook, was a long dark blue coat I didn't recognize. It was too nice, too tailored, too new for anyone in my family. I told myself, it's just a visitor, someone staying for the holiday. But the house was too quiet. The usual symphony of a Christmas preparation, Mom humming, Dad dropping a tool, the dog snoring, was gone. I put my suitcase down gently, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own home. I moved slowly into the kitchen. That's where the real punch came. It was immaculate, too immaculate. The spice rack was rearranged. The mismatched coffee mugs Mom loved were gone, replaced by a sleek set of white ceramics. The old, chipped fruit bowl, replaced by a modern glass pedestal. It was still my kitchen, the layout the same, but the soul was scrubbed clean. Then, I heard voices coming from the living room. Low, warm, laughing voices. My heart, which had been racing with excitement minutes earlier, now hammered with a heavy cold rhythm of confusion. I crept to the archway, paused, and looked in. And that's when the perfect picture I carried in my mind didn't just shatter, it was torched. There was my father, sitting in his favorite armchair. My mother, laughing and sipping tea on the sofa. And between them, taking my spot, the spot I sat in for 20 years, the one near the window where the light hit just right, was a woman. She was older than me, maybe early 30s. Dark hair, perfect smile. She was wearing a thick, hand-knitted scarf, the kind Mom only made for family. She was talking to my parents with an easy, familiar affection, not like a guest, but like someone who belonged. My mother reached out and placed her hand on the woman's arm with a tenderness I hadn't seen since I left. And then my mother said the words that stopped the world from spinning. "Oh, darling," my mother cooed, adjusting the woman's scarf. "You always do such a perfect job wrapping the presents. You're simply the best daughter a mother could ask for." Daughter. The single word echoed in the sudden ringing silence of my mind. It was a physical blow, a shocking cold wave. My body went rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I watched them for another horrifying second. My replacement, my new sister, she wasn't just sitting in my chair. She had taken my role. She was comforting my mother, entertaining my father, and she had wrapped the presents under our tree. The happiness I had felt minutes ago was incinerated, replaced by a sharp, poisonous cocktail of hurt, confusion, and a terrifying, deep-seated betrayal. I took a deep breath, fighting the tears that threatened to ruin my composure. Crying would give them power. Anger was the only shield I had left. "You knew I was coming home for the holidays," I said, a clear statement, not a question. My mother looked down at the floor, defeated. "I told your father it was too late to cancel everything. We had already made plans. You had already made a new life," I finished for her. I finally turned my attention back to Cassandra, who was now quietly gathering her handbag, the picture of a grieved martyrdom. "Don't worry," I told her, my voice dangerously soft. "You won't have to pack your scarf. You can keep the spot. I wouldn't dream of messing up your perfect Christmas arrangement." I walked back to the doorway, picked up my suitcase, and walked right back out of the door, closing it with a gentle, deliberate click. No slamming. No shouting. Just the sound of a closing door that sealed an end. I left behind the perfect picture they had painted, and I knew one thing. I was going to paint a new one. A masterpiece of shame, truth, and justice. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, and frankly, I didn't care. The shock had worn off, and the numbness was fading, leaving a burning, agonizing clarity. Every mile I put between myself and that house, the stronger the anger became, hardening into something cold and sharp. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel 10 miles outside of town. It was ugly, neon lit, and utterly impersonal. Perfect. I checked in, went to the room, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence here wasn't the heavy silence of the lie. It was the empty, sterile quiet of abandonment. I looked at my phone. 2 missed calls from my mother. 2 texts from my father. "Please call, we need to explain." Don't do anything rash. They commit an act of emotional treason, rewrite my entire history with them, and I shouldn't be rash? I wanted to scream, to smash something, but a different instinct took over, the survival instinct of a wounded strategist. I muted the phone and tossed it onto the pillow. I didn't want explanations. Explanations were just excuses wrapped in guilt. What I wanted was the truth, unvarnished and exposed. And I wanted them to feel the isolation they had so casually inflicted on me. I spent the next 4 hours sitting in the dark, replaying the scene. Not just the final crushing moment, but the subtle things I had missed over the years. The slightly shorter calls. The quick excuses when I suggested visiting. The way they always talked about a friend's daughter doing something helpful, but never naming her. They hadn't just replaced me. They had been actively covering it up. They were willing to look me in the eye, hug me at the airport, if I had let them, and participate in a cheerful family lie, all to protect their new, convenient arrangement. The worst part wasn't Cassandra. She was just a player, seizing an opportunity. The betrayal was purely and simply my parents. They showed me, in the clearest possible terms, that my value to them was conditional. It relied entirely on my physical presence and my ability to cater to their domestic needs. And that's when the tears finally came. Not the angry, hot tears of a spoiled child, but the quiet, agonizing tears of a person realizing their bedrock of security, family love, was made of sand. I cried for the 5 years I missed, thinking I was building a future they were proud of. I cried for the little girl who loved Christmas in that house. But as the early light began to creep through the dusty curtains, the tears dried. The sadness didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became fuel. They wanted a nice, clean break. They wanted to believe I would just pack up my feelings and go back to my distant life, leaving them to their cozy new family. No, I was an expert in my field. I was successful because I was meticulous, determined, and I knew how to dig for the facts. I wasn't going back to my distant life yet. I was going to use my skills right here, right now, to get the only thing that could satisfy this hollow ache: justice. Not revenge that would hurt them physically, but revenge that would expose their moral bankruptcy and permanently shut down their cozy lie. My first thought was the house, They had changed it. They had scrubbed my identity out of the kitchen. I needed to see what else they had scrubbed out. My old room was likely still a sanctuary, but what about the family albums? The old keepsakes? The legal documents? I needed to gather evidence. I needed to find a motive that was stronger than loneliness. Because nobody replaces a child just because they're lonely. There's always a hidden financial or emotional pressure point. And I knew exactly who to call to start digging. The game wasn't over. It was Christmas week. And I was about to give my parents the one gift they never expected, the truth. My first move was to reach out to an old contact, a sharp, discreet friend from my college days named Liam, who now worked in corporate finance and specialized in public records. I couldn't trust anyone local, and I definitely couldn't trust my parents' circle of friends. I needed clean, hard facts. I called Liam. I didn't sugarcoat the story. I just laid out the facts. Parents replaced me with a new daughter right before Christmas. I need to know why. I want to see every financial transaction, every property deed, every public record they've touched in the last year. Liam was shocked but professional. He got to work immediately. While he was pulling public records, I knew I had to go back to the source, the house. I still had my key, and I had a hunch they wouldn't have bothered changing the locks. After all, they weren't worried about me stealing their possessions. They were worried about me stealing their peace of mind. I waited until late Tuesday night. The town was asleep, covered in a quiet layer of winter mist. I pulled up 2 blocks away, parked, and walked toward the house under the cover of the old oak trees. I saw the warm glow of the Christmas lights and through the window, the shadow of Cassandra's profile as she sat likely enjoying her victory, her new home. The sight hardened my resolve. The key turned again, silent and smooth. I slipped inside. The house smelled faintly of peppermint and that new unfamiliar air freshener. I bypassed the living room and went straight to my father's locked home office. He kept a fireproof safe hidden behind a bookshelf, and I knew the 4-digit combination, the date of my high school graduation. It was a sentimental, predictable lock. The safe opened with a heavy metallic clunk. Inside, there were no bundles of cash or stacks of diamonds. Just a folder marked Mortgage Refinance Q3 2024 and a series of alarming medical bills. I pulled out the folder and read. My parents had quietly refinanced the house 4 months ago, taking out a substantial amount of equity not for repairs, but to pay off my father's extensive unexpected medical treatments from a year prior. Treatments they had never mentioned. It hit me like a physical illness. The reason I hadn't been home for a year wasn't just my career. It was that they hadn't wanted me to know my father was sick. They didn't want me to worry, but more importantly, they didn't want me to sacrifice my new life to come home and take care of them. But the money they took out wasn't enough. The bank loan documents had a signature on them that wasn't my parents'. It was a witness signature, one that stood out, Cassandra's, and right next to it a strange small line item, caregiver retainer fee. The truth was far more layered than I imagined. They hadn't replaced me simply out of loneliness. They had replaced me out of desperate financial necessity and a need for care. They were deep in medical debt, and they couldn't pay for a professional caregiver. Cassandra wasn't just their friend's daughter. She was a bargain. She was someone who offered them both domestic help and a substantial, low-interest loan, the retainer, likely tying her financial assistance to her inclusion in the family. She was using their vulnerability as leverage. I quickly photographed every page, placed the documents back, and shut the safe. As I crept back through the silent house, I realized the moral twist. They hadn't wanted to bother me with their sickness, yet they were willing to replace me to solve it. They chose pride and convenience over honesty and love. Now I had the full picture. The revenge couldn't just be emotional. It had to be financial and public. I wasn't just fighting for my spot at the table. I was fighting to expose the predatory nature of Cassandra's help. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had 2 days until Christmas Eve. 2 days to set a trap that would expose the deal, the sickness, and the cost of their terrible, quiet betrayal. I spent the next 48 hours in the motel room, hunched over my laptop, communicating with Liam and setting the plan in motion. I had to be careful. My revenge couldn't look petty or hysterical. It had to look like the inevitable consequence of their own bad choices. The goal was simple, public exposure. But not just to the family friends. To the one person whose opinion mattered most to Cassandra, her own social network. Liam confirmed my suspicions about Cassandra. She was an aspiring social influencer, the kind who presented a flawless, aspirational life online. Her Instagram was a catalog of perfectly curated family moments, showcasing her role as the caring helper and beloved daughter to my parents. Every post was a subtle marketing effort for her personal brand. Her weakness wasn't a secret crime, but a secret motive. Her entire relationship with my parents was a transaction disguised as love, and I had the documents to prove it. My first act was subtle. I found an old, joint social media account that my mother and father rarely used, one they had forgotten the password for, but which I had access to from years ago. It was still connected to their local circle. I didn't post anything shocking. I just posted a single, slightly blurry old photo of myself and my parents from a decade ago, looking genuinely happy. The caption was innocent, throwback to my favorite Christmas. So excited to be home. The intent wasn't to confront them yet, it was to destabilize Cassandra. My presence, my existence, suddenly back on their social media, ruined her narrative of being the only daughter. The perfect picture she was selling online was now cracked. Then came the centerpiece of the trap, the Christmas Eve dinner. My parents, determined to maintain their facade, had invited me to the Christmas Eve dinner, a sort of strained polite truce. They likely assumed I'd show up, eat quietly, and then leave, preserving their comfort. They didn't understand that I wasn't coming as a daughter, I was coming as a prosecutor. I knew Cassandra would be there, sitting right next to my father, basking in her role. I needed to ensure that when the truth dropped, it didn't just stay within the room but was broadcast. I reached out to an acquaintance who owned a local catering company. I told her I was hosting a small, exclusive holiday party and needed a high-quality video recording of the toasts for a family keepsake. She recommended a discreet, professional videographer. Perfect. I paid him a significant retainer to attend the dinner, instructing him to keep his camera rolling for the entire 2-hour slot. His presence would simply look like an extravagant gesture from the returning daughter. Finally, the documents. I didn't want to bring the originals. I had Liam create a sleek, professional digital presentation summarizing the financial state of my parents and detailing Cassandra's caregiver retainer fee, showing the clear, predatory exchange of financial support for familial affection. I uploaded it to a private, secure server. I then took a small silver flash drive and uploaded the presentation onto it. The flash drive was innocuous, tiny, and fit neatly into the palm of my hand. This was the bomb. The night before the dinner, I drove by the house one last time. I saw 3 shadows moving happily behind the lit window, the perfect fraudulent family. My heart was a stone. I felt no joy, only the cold, sharp edge of necessity. I was ready. The stage was set, the audience was assembled, and the truth was loaded. Tomorrow, the quiet betrayal would be loudly exposed, and Cassandra's perfect life and my parents' comfortable lie would both be irreversibly destroyed. Christmas Eve. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m. I wore a simple black dress, not for mourning, but for focus. I carried only my clutch and a small silver flash drive tucked deep inside. The house was full. Not just my parents and Cassandra, but all the extended family and local friends, the audience they were trying so desperately to impress. The chatter was loud, the atmosphere thick with fake holiday cheer. My mother hugged me tightly, her eyes pleading for a quiet night. My father looked relieved I was there, thinking I had chosen the path of least resistance. Cassandra, bless her, was dressed in a festive red, playing the hostess, her smile a little too wide, her movements a little too practiced. I greeted everyone politely, accepted a glass of wine, and introduced the videographer, making a casual joke about wanting a record of Dad's terrible Christmas puns. Everyone laughed, accepting the explanation without question. The dinner was torture. I sat on the far end of the table, the guest of honor, but also the outsider. Cassandra was the clear star, managing the kitchen, helping my mother, and even carving the ham with a theatrical flourish. She was the perfect present daughter. But I had something she didn't: the truth. As we moved into the living room for the traditional Christmas toast, I knew my moment had arrived. The videographer was positioned perfectly in the corner, his camera light a discreet, steady red. My father raised his glass first, his voice cracking with emotion. "To family," he said. "To health. To new beginnings, and to those who are here with us tonight." He smiled directly at Cassandra. My mother offered a choked-up toast to the joy of having everyone together. Then it was my turn. I stood up, walked to the center of the room, and raised my glass. All eyes were on me. The chatter stopped. I looked at my parents, then directly at Cassandra. "I'd like to make a toast too," I said, my voice clear and calm. A toast to truth. A toast to the reality that we sometimes choose to hide, even from those we love. I paused, letting the silence stretch. My mother's eyes widened with dawning horror. "We are celebrating a wonderful Christmas here, a picture of a perfect family," I continued. "But the truth is, this perfection comes at a cost. And tonight, I'm going to reveal what that cost is, and who is paying it." I walked over to the large screen TV my father used for sports, which was connected to the family laptop. I discreetly pulled the laptop over, opened it, and plugged in the small silver flash drive. "Before we continue this beautiful celebration," I said, addressing the room, "I'd like to share a short presentation. It's about the true meaning of care." I hit the play button. The lights in the room dimmed. On the screen, the presentation opened with a single slide: "The price of family." The next slide displayed the financial documents I had photographed: the refinanced mortgage, the large debt, and the staggering medical bills. I provided a quiet, calm voiceover for the room, narrating the facts as they appeared. "As many of you know," I explained, "my father has been facing serious medical issues in the last year. He and my mother, unwilling to burden me, chose to hide this. They refinanced their home to pay the initial bills. Then came the devastating slide: the caregiver retainer fee." On it was the highlighted section from the bank documents showing the money paid to Cassandra, and the signed agreement where she tied her financial assistance directly to her inclusion in the family. I turned to her, my voice steel. Cassandra didn't step in out of love or charity. She stepped in because she saw a vulnerable, sick family who needed money, and she leveraged her loan to buy herself a seat at this table. A new social media narrative and a family that wasn't hers. She didn't want to help them. She wanted to own them. Cassandra jumped up, her face a mask of shock and blazing fury. "You can't do this. This is private. These are lies." "They are documents," I corrected, pointing to the screen. "Signed, notarized documents. You bought your way in, Cassandra. And my parents sold their peace and my place to stay afloat." My mother was openly sobbing. My father looked broken, his face pale with shame. The room was buzzing with horrified whispers. The perfect Christmas was utterly destroyed. "And for my parents," I said, turning back to them, my voice softening slightly, though my eyes remained firm. "I love you. And I will help you with this debt." But I needed to expose this truth, because the love of a family is not something you can sell for comfort. It's not something you can buy with a loan. And it is not something you can replace. I pulled the flash drive out, the presentation stopping immediately. The silence in the room was deafening. Cassandra, her entire facade crumbling, grabbed her coat and fled the room, leaving her expensive Christmas presents untouched under the tree. The shame was complete. My goal wasn't to punish them with cruelty, but to hit them with the unavoidable reality of their choice. Justice was served. The guests left quickly. The videographer packed up his camera, quietly shaking my hand before he left. The room, so recently filled with the sounds of fake cheer, was now cold and empty. It was just the three of us left in the wreckage of the perfect Christmas dinner. My father finally spoke, his voice hollow. Why? Why did you do this publicly? We could have talked. We could have, I agreed, sitting back down in the quiet living room. But you chose to lie publicly. You chose to introduce a fraud to everyone we know. I needed to ensure that she couldn't continue her transaction. And I needed to make sure you understood the gravity of your choice. You weren't just being kind. You were being predatory and selling me out. My mother crawled over to me, grabbing my hand. We were scared. We were so scared of the treatments, of the bills. We didn't want to worry you. We just needed help, and she was here. I was always here, I said, gently pulling my hand away. One phone call, one honest conversation. That's all it would have taken. But you made a decision that showed me the limits of your trust and the terms of your love. Over the next few hours we talked. It wasn't a tearful, cinematic reconciliation. It was a cold, pragmatic business meeting. I told them I would pay off the medical debt, refinance the house cleanly, and set them up with proper non-predatory financial support. But the emotional relationship, the picture of the perfect family I carried, that was destroyed. I stayed 2 more days, handling the financial logistics. I never saw Cassandra again. Her social media was scrubbed and deactivated within 24 hours. The public shame was enough to shut down her entire operation. When I finally left on the day after Christmas, the house was silent. The lights were off. I didn't hug my parents goodbye. I simply handed them a folder with the new financial plan and the number for a reputable home care service. This is the last time you'll have to choose convenience over honesty, I said. Now I am going to choose honesty over proximity. I drove away, leaving them alone in their empty, quiet house. They had what they wanted: solvency and health, but they had lost the foundation of their family. And that is the final lesson, the cold truth I learned. The greatest betrayal is not always the dramatic explosion. Sometimes it's the quiet, systematic, and convenient replacement of your worth. Family love is meant to be a secure harbor, not a conditional transaction. When you find the people who should love you most are willing to sell your place for comfort or money, you have to be the one to expose the truth. You have to destroy the lie to save yourself. I got my revenge, I achieved justice. And I saved my parents from a financial predator. But I paid the ultimate cost. I finally accepted that the perfect picture of home I held in my mind was nothing more than a beautiful, heartbreaking lie.